Should I start now? What?
Yeah, start.
Yeah, okay. All right. First, I just want to take this opportunity to thank Rabbi and Mrs. Goldenhirsch and Baruch Kelman. Every year they organize this Haskara for my father. It's very interesting. There's a story told that the Chayim, when he reached his elderly years, it's well known, he wanted to move to Eretz Yisrael. And a number of the Doli Yisrael in Europe, they met with the Chavetz Chaim to try to convince him not to go to Eretz Yisrael because he was necessary in Europe. And at that time, the Chavetz Chaim said he's an old man already, and there's very little that he can do, that he can accomplish in Europe. And so the Reb Chaim Ozer said to the Chavetz Chaim that when the grandfather or the elderly father sits at the table, all the children sit together. His just being there serves a purpose. In other words, he was focusing on the fact that everybody would identify with the Chavetz Chaim. Everybody would come together to be together with the Chavetz Chaim. I think that in addition to, while it's certainly true that when what Reb Chaim Moses said, but I think the reverse is also true. That in a sense, even after a person passed away, but if the members of the family come together, if the person is a Rebbe, Vishinantam levanecha elu talmidecha, it's the type of Rebbe that has a parental perspective when he deals with the students. So when the Talmidim, the children, the spiritual children who continue the heritage come together, so in a sense, the elderly parent, the Rebbe, even if he passed away, is still there. And it's with that in mind that I want to thank Rabbi and Mrs. Goldenhirsch and Baruch Kelman for, in a sense, contributing. My father is alive, in any case, through his Talmidim and because of the deeds that he did. But the fact that every year, from all over, we gather together, whether on the internet or in person, that in itself contributes to that feeling of my father's Atzal, and in a sense, the father of his Talmidim are keeping him alive, are contributing to keeping him alive. And it's in line with that I want to mention a medrash, and the pshat that I heard many years ago from my father, and I mentioned this medrash at the time of my father's levaya. The medrash says that after Eve encountered all the tragedies, he saw a vision. And in the vision, he saw a sukkah with 4 walls. He saw a sukkah with 3 walls. And he saw a sukkah with 2 walls and a tefach. There are other versions of that same medrash, but the idea is more or less the same. So the pshat is, what the question is, what is the meaning of this medrash? And my father, Zatzal, explained the medrash by mentioning that the halacha, that even a sukkah that does not have all four walls, that has three walls, and the way we paskin, even two walls on a tefach in certain situations is kosher, seems to go counter to another halacha regarding sukkah. Because regarding sukkah, the halacha is that Teshvu came to Duru. In other words, a person, the manner that he's required to sit in sukkah is one that affords him the ability to have, at least to a certain degree, the comfort that he has in his house. Teshvu came to Duru. Now, who would live in a house that was missing one wall? Who would live in a house that has two walls and one tefach, totally exposed to the outside? So how is this halacha to be understood from the perspective I'm talking in a hashkafa sense, to be understood with the halacha of Teshvu came to Duru? And my father suggested that the halacha says that sometimes when there is one wall missing from the sukkah, and sometimes even more than one wall missing from the sukkah, we consider it that those walls are there. And this was the message that was given to Eiv. Eiv encountered such tragedies. The members of his family died. So, but the message is that sometimes we can have the attitude, and this is a general Yom Tov attitude from the perspective of minhagim, that those who passed away, those who are not here, those who had an impact on us are still here. We see the Ashkenazi custom is on the last days of Yom Tov, we say Yisker. Sukkot, we say it on Shmini Atzeres because we prefer not to say it on Simchas Torah. But why? On one hand, Yisker is recalling tragedy. On the other hand, Yom Tov is a day of simcha, a day of joy. The minhag Ashkenaz again is that Avelim don't daven for the Yomid, not Shabbos and not on Yom Tov. But I think that, in other words, when the family would come together on Yom Tov, that's when you notice who is missing. When you make mention of them, when you remember them, you not only focus on who is missing, but to a certain degree, when you make mention of them, they're still there. So on the contrary, the saying of the Yisker and the Yom Tov, it's like the missing walls of the sukkah. And when we gather together, this strengthens our ability to see the missing walls of the sukkah. Now, but I want to explain this medrash a little further by mentioning a question that my father asked I'll mention the answer that my father gave, but I'm going to suggest, and I have suggested in the past, a different answer, but I think they're both relevant today. My father, Zatzal, would always emphasize, we know it, but he would emphasize when he spoke on Sukkot, he would say that Sukkot is really two separate holidays. On one hand, it's the Chag HaSukkos. On the other hand, it's the Chag Osif. And he would say, if my recollection is correct, I might be using the wrong words, that the Chag HaSukkos, that represents the spiritual celebration. And the Chag Osif, there we give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the mundane. My father would call it the national, the nationalistic perspective of Klal Yisrael. And he would imply the same thing in regard to Hanukkah. And my father would say, the lulav and esrig, that's expressive, that's the agricultural, it represents the Chag Osif. And we have to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, we have to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for our spiritual heritage. But we also have to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the national heritage, you could call it the economic benefits of our nation, what some would consider the mundane support that HaKadosh Baruch Hu through nature gives us. So this is how my father explained it. And in order to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for both, we have to value both. Unfortunately, to a large degree, today, there are those who recognize the importance and the significance of one area for Klal Yisrael. They think the only thing significant is, and of course it is significant, perhaps more significant than anything else, is the Torah, the spiritual aspect. But the mundane needs of Klal Yisrael are also very important. In main kemach ein Torah, in main Torah ein kemach. Both are important. I remember many years ago, this was shortly after the 6-Day War. And I was walking home from my father from shul. And at that time, there was a certain Rav, a Gadol B'Torah, a posek who, from time to time, I think every year, would speak in the shul where we davened. And the shul happened to have been the Mizrahi, the religious Zionist, so he had to speak about the victory of the 6-Day War. Probably would have preferred not speaking about it. And he said that because of the Jews that were sitting and saying Tehillim, the Jewish people had a victory. And I remember my father walking home from shul, was about a mile walk from the shul to the house. And my father was very upset. He wasn't upset about the fact that Rav praised those who said Tehillim. He was not upset about the Rav praising those who davened to save the nefashos of Klal Yisrael. But he was very upset that in giving credit for the victory, for the salvation, and at that time, before the war, of the 6-Day War, everybody was so scared. I remember them saying, whether it's true or not, I don't know, that they were digging up the courtyards of the schools because they might have to have extra graves to bury people who were killed during the war. But of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu acted on behalf of Klal Yisrael, and there was a great salvation. Not that there weren't tragedies. There is always tragedies. And my father had no problems with those who said Tehillim, those who sat and learned. But he felt that it was important to give credit to those who fought the war also, who sacrificed their lives on behalf of Klal Yisrael. And in line with this, I just want to mention there is a Hasidic minhag that people take. It's not our minhag for halachic reasons. When they make the bracha on the lulav and esrog, they go into the sukkah to make the bracha on the lulav and esrog. The sukkah is the anani hakavod. That's the spirituality. And they take the lulav and esrog, which according to my father represented the Chag, the mundane gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Klal Yisrael. And I reiterate that unless we appreciate the importance of both, our expression of appreciation to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is somewhat hollow. So my father recognized the need, that we have to recognize the contribution of everybody. I want to explain that medrash somewhat in a different manner. Now, I'm not disagreeing, chas v'shalom, with what my father said. But I mention all the time, I'm not going to go into detail now, that we have a double relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We say it in Shemona Esrei 3 times every day. And when there's Musaf 4 times, in Yom Kippurim 5 times. Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosenu. We say it actually more. We have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu based on the perception of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the lives of our ancestors. And we have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu based on the perception of God's presence in our own lives. And I think that when we take a look at both Pesach and Sukkot, we see both concepts. Pesach, we say, Lo esavosenu b'levad gal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ef ela afosanu gal imahem. So we recognize that we were together, we were redeemed together with our ancestors. And So, and then on Sukkot, we say that ki leman yedu dorosechem ki basukos hoshafti es bnei Yisrael meretz Mitzrayim. In order, what is the purpose of sitting in Sukkah? That future generations should know that the Jewish people were sat in Sukkot when they went out of Egypt. That's very interesting. The word leman yedu dorosechem, you should know. Why is it necessary to sit in Sukkah to know? Remember, there's many schiris. Zochareis hashirasa l'cha molek. But here we have to sit in the Sukkah. Why is it? But Yediyah is more than just schira. Yediyah, the Rambam at the beginning of Hilchos Yisod Torah, the first halach in the Rambam, Yisod HaYisodos V'Amud HaChochmos, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all knowledge. Leida, to know. Sheyesha Matzui Rishon, there is one who is there first, or before everything. V'hu Mamsi Kol HaNimtza, and he brings into being everything that's there. V'chol HaNimtzam B'Shamayim U'Varetz, and everything that's found in heaven and earth, U'Beineihem, and between them. Eino Ela Ma'amitas Himtzo. And many ask the question, why does the Rambam says, Leida, to know? Why doesn't the Rambam say Lahamin, to believe? And Rabbi Chana Wasserman in his Sefer, it's very interesting that he suggests this. He says there's a difference between Leida and Lahamin. Lahamin means to believe. Leida means to understand philosophically. But he says we're not on that madrega. Many are not on that madrega to understand. So, but the ultimate goal would be Leida. I heard from my uncle that he explained it. Actually, I read it in the notes of his Tshuva Shiurim. He says Leida means to experience. He says when you see the sun going up, it's not that you're observing the sun going up. Leida means to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu putting the sun up. You experience God. You penetrate the curtain of nature. And you see HaKadosh Baruch Hu behind the curtain of nature. And I think that's the same thing. Leman yedu dorosechem, that your future generations should experience the past. But it's very interesting. There's a minute, it's not a halacha. And it's very interesting. My father was makpid. It's not the thing that I would have thought that my father would be makpid on. But my father was makpid very much on saying du Spisen. What is du Spisen? Du Spisen basically is to invite in the former generations of Klal Yisrael. This is the experience. This is the idea. We in Sukkot, we sense the presence of God in the life of our ancestors. And Leman Yedu Dorosechem, in a sense, we have to re-experience it, And that's why we invite Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Ahron, Yosef, David, Shlomo. We invite them all in. Every night we invite all of them, but one is like the guest of honor of the particular night. So, but it's in a sense identifying with the past. And the other aspect of Sukkot is the Chag Osef, The Chagosiv is the sustenance that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us. Our harvest season is over. So, in a sense, it's focusing on the present of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our own lives. But it's very interesting, when we focus on the Chag HaSukkos, the past, there's a difference between Pesach and Sukkot. In Pesach, we say, Lo asavosenu b'vad gal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ela afa sanu gal imahem. To a certain degree, Pesach, we go into the past. We join the Jewish people in leaving Egypt. But when it comes to the Spizen, we invite them into the present. We bring Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov into the present. It's a lot easier to go into the past and not to deny and not to recognize the reality of the situation of today. But on one hand, my father would go into the past. He would, when you talk, I remember someone once went over to my father and he said, a little bit on the arrogant side, people say over the name of Reb Chayim. Well, I thought a machshava about the Akedah. He says, I don't believe Reb Chaim said it. And my father said to him, not only Reb Chaim said it, but I could tell you the exact same words that Reb Chaim used. Now, my father, when Reb Chaim passed away, was approximately 1 year old, depending on which year my father was born. So but my father, through his father, it's not just that he heard the Chedushim of Reb Chaim. It's not that he experienced the page of Chedushay Rabbeinu Chaim Halevi. He was able to experience Reb Chaim. And that was unique about my father. Every yeshiva today learns Kedushay Rabbeinu Chaim Halevi. That's the derech, the capture Torah. But they experience the Chedushim of Reb Chaim. They don't experience Reb Chaim himself. I was told many years ago, but I never said it because I didn't know that it was known. But I recently got a call, and I was not told this by my father. I don't think my father even knew about it. I'm sure my father didn't know about it. There was a certain Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshivas Rabbeinu Chaim, Reb Chaim Berlin. And my father, at a young age, before he was married, well, his first job was teaching the Mesivtat Ferush Yerushalayim by Moshe Feinstein. I was told by people that when my father left Ferush Yerushalayim to go to Rabbeinu Chaim Berlin, so Moshe Feinstein, someone told me, was actually crying. And he used the expression, there's a whole story behind it. I'm not going to go into the story now. He said, who can explain a Rambam like Rav Ahron? That was what Moshe Feinstein said at that time, according to what I was told. And then when my father went to Reb Chaim Berlin, again, it was before he was married, he had this year below Rav Hutner. I heard from Rav Yaakov Perlo, the Neveminsker Rebbe, when he gave the Hesped Shloshim on my father, that when my father came into Chaim Berlin, Rav Hutner told my father, the Beis Medrash is yours. And I heard from other Talmidim at that time the whole Rischa D'Oraisa, and that time Chaim Berlin was considered the outstanding yeshiva in America. The whole Rischa D'Oraisa that took place in Rabbeinu Chaim Berlin took place around my father. The whole learning in the Beis Medrash was around my father. And so one of the Rosh Yeshivas who was there was those days. Almost all the Rosh Yeshivas in Rabbeinu Chaim Berlin. This was the early years of Rabbeinu Chaim Berlin. Were European Rebbeim. They came from Europe. And one of the Rosh Yeshivas that came from one of the most miyuchnistic families in the yeshiva world. He used to write a diary. And in the diary, he wrote that the day he met Rav Ahron Soloveichik, he began to understand the greatness of Reb Chayim. In other words, my father taught not only the Torah of Reb Chayim, but he was able to give over something much more than just what was written on the page. It wasn't just limited to the intellectual contribution of Reb Chayim. It was the chesed of Reb Chayim. It was the midos of Reb Chayim. It was who Reb Chayim was. It wasn't an act by my father. It was who he was. I mentioned at the hesped of my father that the Torah tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu went to get the Luchos, went up the mountain, Har Sinai, so that Yehoshua accompanied him part of the way up to a certain point. And Rashi says, in any Yodea Mativo Shel Yehoshua Khan. I don't know what is what was the importance of Yeshua there. And Rashi suggests a certain explanation that doesn't go counter to what I'm going to suggest. But it's perhaps a different emphasis. Reb Chaim, the Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah wasn't only what he wrote. The Torah wasn't only what he said, but his very being was Torah. It wasn't any act like a teacher who takes lessons, not finding fault with the taking courses in education. It wasn't an act. He wasn't an actor. It was who he was. And Yehoshua was the one who continued the Masorah. He had to give over the Torah of Moshe. And the Torah of Moshe wasn't only what he said. The Torah of Moshe wasn't only what he wrote. The Torah of Moshe was his expressions, his feelings, his emotions, things that sometimes can't even be put into words. There are Rosh Yeshivas, great Rosh Yeshivas, but their main Masorah could be put on paper. But by my father, the Masorah that could be put in paper is a very great Masorah. But that's not the only Masorah. The Masorah is who he was. His emotions, his feelings, his commitment, his dedication, his devotion, his emes. He didn't succumb when the whole world was against him. Again, regarding my father, you could say he was made b'echad, and Kol Olam sometimes was against him. Do you know and this is only an example, when with Chadash and Yashan, the world galvanized themselves against my father. It became the frum thing to insist on eating Chadash. I mean, things that today you couldn't even believe that people would act so foolish. There were incidents where people at a table in a dinner, and my father was sitting at the table, they would say, "Pass the Chadash plate." It was Kolo against him on that. And when he came to the defense of helpless people, where there was people who had handicapped children, my father sometimes stood alone. And it would have been easier for him not to fight, but that wouldn't have been emes. My father was an ish emes. And so the idea is, my father, it's not only that he taught Torah, that he learned Torah, but his essence was Torah, his very being was Torah. Chazal tell us that when Moshe Rabbeinu came down from the Har Sinai, so there were rays of light that emanated from his face, and he had to wear a masveh, a veil. But when he taught Torah, when he was teaching them, he raised the veil. What's the idea? But the idea is, a Sefer Torah, when it's not being used, is covered. But when it's being used, it's open. The words of Moshe Rabbeinu was Torah. But the expressions on his face, his very being was also Torah. So the rays of light emanated from him. In other words, you should know that he himself, and one of the Medrash Rabbah says, where did the rays of light come from? There are a number of explanations, but one is, it was the ink, when he was writing the Torah, the leftover ink was sometimes on his hand, and he would rub it against his face. What does that mean? But I think what it means is the leftover ink was the things of Torah that wasn't written down, and sometimes couldn't be written down. The Torah Shebaal Peh, but there is a Torah Shebaal Peh that can't even be expressed orally. You have to experience it. L'man yedu doroseichem. But it's easy to experience it if you go into the past. It's more difficult to bring it to the present. And that was my father. My father was able to bring Reb Chayim, to bring the Beis Halevi, to apply it to contemporary situations, and to comply, and to inspire, and to teach those of our time. And that's just what we have to know today. We have to know today that, yes, my father isn't here, but we Talmidim, especially when we gather together, the Rebbe is there, my father's there. A parent, even when the children are not, even when the parent is no longer alive, if the children are there, very often when you sit down to a Seder, when you sit down, whatever it is, the parent is there. And I think that's if a Rebbe, Vishinantam Uvanecha Elu Talmidecha. But if it's just Talmidecha and not Banecha, then the parent is not there, then the Rebbe is not there. My father, it was Vishinantam Uvanecha Elu Talmidecha. He had a parental approach. And we who gathered today, have the approach, we as Talmidim, I certainly have that approach. I'm a child, but we were all his children. It's us who is keeping my father as Zatzal alive. Okay. Okay. Hello?
Hello.
What?
You hear us? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Picture down.
Okay. Okay, fine. Right.
Grandpa. With your kid, I think what's the big deal? They're not yours again. I like them all. The reason my father was very locked on your account. I remember if he was out of the house and once he had pulled my mother up and and your was on Shabbos. So we had in our dining room, we had these two, I'm not gonna have memories. We had dining room, we had four lights on. Speak closely. Yeah, we had these four lights next to the wall, and my father would pull those lights on before Shabbos. So when Shabbos ended, Yahrzeit started to be some light, and then when his time was over, we let Yahrzeit candles. My father was very much that I'm the Yahrzeit candle. I'm the Yahrzeit, but I guess he didn't like the Yahrzeit candle. The rest, the other stars. I think the reason why he liked that was because he was playing that he became a terrorist, that he would light it on the other stars and so on. Light it on Yom Sheni. That's why he was great. But he didn't like it as a either. However, so I ran back to the house to light the Yahrzeit candle. I know I'm not going to light the Yahrzeit candle. But I had a problem because this country where the whole lot is used for healing, right? So you have to go, and then right now I'm in a stage of my life where I'll come back to that, but some of my kids are grown up, and the ones that are not married, right now one of them is his name is actually after my father. Our Soloveichik is in Gaza City. I'll come back to him. Somewhere in Gaza City. Another one who's in Balak. He's finishing training, but he was actually on Yom Kippur. He was living Shira in Harav in the Dead Sea. But back in those days, I was very busy for a while. So he stayed, I learned in the morning and go on in the afternoon. And actually, I learned from my father when I was a young child that it's very important to spend time with your children. Why did I learn that? There was one time my father was following residence, Los Angeles. So the biggest time was Los Angeles. But we went one afternoon to Los Angeles, and then I guess he gave Shir Tuesday evening and Shabbos and Sunday. He came back, and I was 10, I was 11 years old, that's all it was. And he told me a story. I still remember this. He said to me, and by the way, as you all know, my father loved to learn, and there was nothing more important than I found him learning. And when he had the time, he would learn 18 hours a day. He came back. He told me that Thursday morning he couldn't give share because everyone's working. So the place where we're staying is on Soloveichik. Because you can't give share till this evening, I bought 2 tickets to Disneyland for you and me. It's my father, okay? My father said that, I'd rather learn. It's okay. I think to go to Disneyland, okay? He came over to me when he came back. He told me the story. He said to me, "I want you to know if you were there, I would have taken a day off to go to Disneyland." Okay? And at that age, I understood, by the way, how important it was to my father. And the fact he said that, it touched me. And by the way, he's telling the truth. really want me to this and that. Years later, I went to this one. I think it was overrated a little bit, but still, but that being said, it's very important. So, finding a million in this country, the Mitzvah, so my rib and Shachar, they got in show. Because I do, I got Mitzvah, I'm finding a million in this country. Come on, it's very easy. The million all over the place. You never all over the place. So we went there here, Park Facility. I never had a problem. And I could not find another person. I went back and forth. At that point, my son Moshe was already by mitzvah. Obviously, he was already by mitzvah. And I'm not sure my son who was. We went together. And I said, okay, I'm looking one more time. And then I'm going to go to Iskut. I'm going to go to Iskut. So it's never brought. And then I happened to guess, there was a family of Hasidim taking pictures across the bar. And I heard them say, we're going to take this last picture. We're going to document it. It says, Valdik, so I said, can I join you? I have a team on your side. Sure. One of the Hasidim, they said, wow, this is such a wonderful young man. The Baksham in the park, we took pictures. He said, and we even have a chiyurim. Yeah. They don't know Soloveichik yet, so I didn't talk about that. So then he looked at me and it was a little appropriate because he's saying someone is a chiyurim. That means that someone passed away, and he told me what's like to say that. So he apologized. I said to him, it's okay. I'm not sure what your said was. I said, yeah, I'm not sure what I said, okay, it's already been a number of years. And today I look at the Yahrzeit of the day that they have on the bar, which is wonderful. And therefore, I try to learn from my parents and my father and this Yahrzeit. There's so many things. There's so many things that I can learn from. And I want to start with not necessarily shiurim, something that I didn't think about talking about. It could be some of you heard of it, but I saw here Dr. Matthews. I haven't seen him a long time, and I remember Dr. Matthews was the one who was practiced acupuncture on my father. And I have to tell you, I think it's very important that I remember my father practiced acupuncture, and he really believed it. And I'm not sure if you all heard this, but sometime afterwards, I'm not sure if you were still in the country, Dr. Matthews, but my father spoke at the OU convention. And Friday night, he was told to give a parsha sheet. And that week, that Shabbos, it turned out, and I remember who was there, not listening names, were Shivas that were there, and they were just blown away by what my father said. What idea. Okay? And that week was Parshat Sarah. And then the Parshat Sarah, before Ahron died, he had to build a Bnei collection. And it says he sent them to the Kedem, and he gave them matanos. There's a whole discussion around matanos. And my father mentioned that he saw in Rav Kasper's Sefer that matanos are sharp stones, and he taught them a refuah based on these sharp stones, and he sent them to the Far East. And my father said, what did he teach them? He taught them acupuncture. Okay? And my father at that time, I remember he said, remember my father, never heard this? Never heard it? Okay, I heard it. He said, hey, who was impressed? He said, by the way, he can explain how acupuncture works. He'll say something else. He said, it's about the endorphins. Remember, not endorphins. And he said at that time that he pointed out, you explained to me, the research that with a certain points that you put the acupuncture in, it sends signals to the brain to send up endorphins, which goes ahead and it sends up a certain excitement. He very much did this. Matter of fact, he said that many of these Jews that were killed on Kiddush Hashem over the generations, right, did not feel pain at that moment because of the excitement of being a Kaddish Shemayim. That's what he said. But that time he said he felt a little bad. Why? Because where did acupuncture come from? It all came to the Far East. There's a lot of Odazara there, so he felt uncomfortable. But then when he saw this medrash, he felt much better. Because this refuah comes from Ahron. And by the way, that was my father. I think the most important thing about my father is that he something that he followed the Torah, whether it was halacha or it was hashkafa, agadita. He didn't just learn. Everything that he saw became part of his Belgian child and how he should act and behave, and it really guided everything he did. He said, and that's what he said when he spoke about that's Torah. He said, "What's that's Torah? That Torah doesn't mean. It doesn't mean," he said, "that there are things from the that's Torah. That's Torah means you look in the Torah, when you look in the Gemara, you look at halacha, you look at a pasuk, and you see a certain idea. That in itself is that's Torah." And I just want to, with that, I want to speak about a little what I intended to speak about. So this year, actually a few weeks ago, I was very bothered by a certain Ramban. And Parshas Vayelech, so the Torah tells us in Parshas Vayelech, Vayichtav Moshe Torah Azos, that the beginning of Parshas Vayelech, the Torah tells us on Pasuk Tes, Vayichtav Moshe Torah Azos, Vayitna Lakonim Me'alevi, Hanosim Esavim Yisrael, Malkum Yisrael, and then Moshe Lemor, Mikit Sheva Shamin at the end of 7 years, Moed Pasuk Mitzvah B'Chad Sukkos, he spoke with the mitzvah of Hakel. Now, what's Vayichtav Moshe Torah Azos? So, he wrote, it sounds like he wrote a certain portion of the Torah, but later in the parsha, where the Torah goes on and says, and Pasuk Chavei, Vayichtav Moshe Torah Azos, Israel. So first Moshe wrote the Torah Azos, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the Shira, and then in Pasuk Chavei, the Pasuk says, Vayichtav Moshe the Shira Azos Yomahu, Ulamas Yisrael, he wrote the Shira, he wrote the Shira, he wrote the people. The Yitzhak is Yeshua Binun Ben Yomer Chazak Ben Maki Asaf Lavi Yisrael Yisrael or Oret is the Yisrael Lam and Oche Yemucha and if I hear Chalos Moshe Sibir Torah Azon Chal Sibir Tumam it says and Moshe finished writing this paper the Sibir Torah until it was finished. The Yitzhak Moshe Bolvim Los Armas until more and Moshe commanded him and he told him to go ahead and put it next to the Ahron. The Ramban asked the question, what's going on here? And Pasuk says, and he gave it to Kohen Levi. And also Hashem. And Pasuk Gimel after the Shira, by he Halas Moshe Torah Zibra Torah Azot on paper on Tumah. Then he told the Levim to put it in the Ahron. The question is, what happened again in Parsha? Why again in Parsha he didn't tell him to go ahead and to put it in the Ahron? And now then he did it. Ramban says something fascinating. Ramban says that when Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Torah to the people in Pasuk Tes, wasn't complete. The Shira wasn't there yet. Shira wasn't there. But that's the Ramban has a lesson. The Ramban says that if the Moshe results all right. So that's what he said. In this Ramban, it could be referring to what happened at the end, right? But as of yet, did not write down, according to the Ramban, in Paragraph Aleph, he did not write down the Shira yet. Shira only came after Hakadosh Baruch Hu told him the Shira, only at that point. So the question is why? So why is it the first time he didn't open next to the Ahron? And the second time he says now put it in the Ahron. And Ramban says like this. He says, he says, why? Because the first time the Torah wasn't finished yet. You still write the Shira. Then did the Brachos. Still need the Shira. You have to write the Shira. He says, however, once he finished over here and was done, now has to be next to the Ahron. Why is next to the Ahron now? Because once it's next to the Ahron, he says, this point you can't add on to or take away from it. In other words, the reason the first time Moshe did not tell the Kohanim to put it next to the Ahron because it wasn't complete. Being in the Ahron means it's a complete book. You can't add on to it. But Moshe Rabbeinu knew that something was going to be added on, and therefore he didn't say that. But after the Shira was given over, and now the Torah was complete. So now Moshe Baruch Hu went ahead and told him, and Moshe told him, so put it next to the Ahron. Why? Because now it's complete. Now you can never go ahead and add to it. And Ramban, by the way, had the sheet of the Rambam that Shmona Function of the Torah was also written by Moshe Rabbeinu. Now it's complete. Now it's complete. You can't add on to it. That's the Rambam. What bothered me is that Moshe Rabbeinu felt it wasn't until later and gave it again. Why did he go ahead and give it the first? In other words, why did he give it before he gave the Shira? And why did he give it again after the Shira? Then finally said it was complete. There are a number of answers you can give, and I actually I got it from Parshas Vayelech, and I discussed it from time to soul, and I didn't give an answer. I asked the question, I heard a few different answers. I've asked people around this answer, and I'm sure there are many answers you can give. But One thing my father pointed out, and his English book is based on this, that there are two very important parts of the Torah. There's the halacha, based on the Sifri, and there's the Gadata. Okay? And my father liked to call it the logic of the heart and the logic of the mind. Halacha is the logic of the mind. The Gadata is the logic of the heart. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to give them two stages so that really that you be fooled and think that that one one is important and the other is not important. Both are really important. Not only that, Ramban also says that at first Moshe wrote the Shira. First he wrote the Shira separately, and then he put it into the Torah itself. But to realize that the logic of the heart and the logic of the mind are both very important. Halacha, remember my father was saying when my father went ahead and my father taught a Gaita, he taught a Gaita tomorrow. Yeah, I can go ahead and ask. I can ask here. I wasn't in my father's Shabbat, but who here was my father's Shabbat? Not with my father's Shabbat. And Sugi is the field at the very end of the first parak. I think he didn't skip any Gaita to my father because he felt Gaita. This is important. Everything else. He also learned how to go ahead and how you live a life. Every word of Torah is really important because every word of Torah, nothing is right, nothing is empty, because every word of Torah teaches us how we should go ahead and how we should live a life. And for that reason, the halacha and the agada, and for that reason, the Torah went ahead. And, the Torah would Moshe Rabbeinu gave it first. The halacha is important, but also to show it wasn't complete without a God. Because you need a God. You gave him two stages. So it's not complete. You go ahead and you both together. So for that reason, when Shiloh came up, whether it's Shiloh of halacha, that was always you have to go ahead and you have to look at the Torah and see what the Torah says. And I'm going to share with you something. The father has discussed. I have to say, first, I can say this. And I'm sure he would say this also. That he had grandchildren. He has grandchildren, and he has great grandchildren that were very involved in sport. Okay, I know the exact number. You want me to daven for? I'm happy to give you. You know, he was very proud of my nephew, and he saw my nephew in his uniform many years ago, and there's I don't like counting, but I'll do it anyway. I know there's outside my family, besides that, before there were two. One was in Gaza, one was in the southern area. I myself had, I guess, three or four. One of them did something. I'm not sure we do something. So one of my sons, actually, my son Ahron, was in Gaza. He went into Gaza back in Africa. And I shot him. And you know, he doesn't have his phone. He follows the rules. But every hour shop says, sometimes he calls me up. He follows Commander's phone. By the way, you should know that in Gaza City is terrible. You should know. Okay? Now, this is what's better. I don't know what we're going to get out to the terrible job. But anyway, you go ahead and the Rosh Hashanah said to me, I'm supposed to go in first day of Rosh Hashanah in the afternoon. The Mitzvah Shem says to be able to go over and see what to do. So then he went in Rosh Hashanah afternoon. And then I said to him, so what happened the second day? So then he told me, so this group and happy social. He said to me, Abba, from the time I went into the tank until the 36th hour, right? Don't just understand my brother spoke about my father's concern that we should give credit to the soldiers. Okay? The soldiers need a lot of credit. And from my perspective, most of the credit, but first of all, the soldiers are very yeshiva. That's number one. Okay? And they're dominant. And number two, yes, talent is very important. But there's a difference between saying talent and the medrash and being at tank for 36 hours. We have to recognize it. We have to recognize it. I'll come back to that. So, this is your mitzvah. This Yom Kippur, we spoke, and Urban people we spoke, and we spoke about the bracha, and told me what and then we spoke Friday. This was a surprise. We met him so and we're talking on the phone, and he said to me, "What happened to me?" Because he had to get things fixed, and he could he had to go after. That's what he saw, and he said that's minion, but he said to me, I didn't feel like it was Yom Kippur. I said, obviously, I feel like it was Yom Kippur. But if you're eating Yom Kippur, which you're supposed to do, you have to. But I want to say something. There's a perception in the second. So he saw a word coming out of the court, and what it says is, "Hitzku Talia, the Nakku, La'ata, Karba Batuchya." That the Yom Kohanim wanted victory on Tuchya. And the question is, when did this happen? When did he hear this word coming out of the court? Rashi, said, Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol was in the Kohen discussion Yom Kippur, and he hears this. Okay, fine. What does that have to do with us? So there's a sefer written by Yehuda, the Kohen and he said, "The one just on Tuchya." It was also in us. He quotes you, Josephus, there was also in us. Now, why they don't discuss, what happened in Gaza? It could be like it is today. We're afraid of public being there. We have to have a victory in Gaza. I don't know what the reason why. But it is. So I said to him, a voice came out of the that there was a victory in Gaza. So obviously, fighting a war in Gaza is definitely immoral. And I felt very confident. This is something that my father would always say. He wouldn't stop to say something. It was something in Torah. He believed it. He said it, and he tried, and he went ahead and definitely tried. Wherever you go ahead, you learn Torah. It's not just you learning halakha. It's just you learning halakha. Everything that you learn can affect your life, and you can learn from it not just halakha. What our outcome might be. Stuff is very important. We want to Torah. Go ahead and teach us. And I just want to finish off with two more points, and then that's the idea that I got to and the Torah and it's very important because both of these make up the Torah that we have to learn from, but just two more points I want to mention. One is have to kind of and I want to maybe it's a story that you heard. There are two yourself in the story. There's a story of the gifts of my uncle's family and the gifts of my father. So I discussed with my father and I follow my father's gifts. Many years ago, my father was when my grandfather not well. He was not well one year. My father was a young boy, and my grandfather Moshe was sitting in Europe, and for a few months to recover. Who was going to go with my father? He asked my father. I was a young boy because who else was very busy? What did my father do? So they were doing Yom Kippur, and my father, as I'm told, was very precocious. He got into davening a lot of emotional energy, right? A lot of emotional energy. And he was sitting next. He always told me he was sitting next to his father, and he was saying the davening on Kippur night out loud, screaming a lot of passion, a lot of emotion. And the chazan gets to Shema Kolein, Shema Kolein, Hashem Elokeinu, Chos B'Racheinu, Aleinu V'Kadel B'Rach, Merdas B'Maseinu. My father screams it out, right? And he says, Hashiveinu, Hashem Elokeinu L'Shuva, Chavei Shemeinu V'Kedem. Again, my father. Then, Al Hashem L'Shuva, the Prophet of Zayim. Father was big one. He moved himself. After davening, my grandfather and father, the whole davening was this you need to say? Grandfather, what do you want? He says, I'll just family is no, what am I? 8, 9, 10 years old. Been old age for a long time. And my grandfather said to my father that hashkafa, but brisker hashkafa. That's what I know it's a real. Because you have to understand, there are two types of old age. Okay? There's actual old age and there's emotional old age. You're right. Reaction. You know, time until you get to it. There's emotional. Emotional age is that you try to do something, and all of a sudden you go ahead, and something's blocking you, something's stopping you, and you want to give up. That's called emotion. Yeah, it can happen. 9, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. You want to go ahead, and you want to give up. Our family is sick enough. There's no control. When I'm ready to give up, I feel emotionally old and down. Don't throw me out. Give me the courage and the ability to go ahead and fight. Go ahead. I still remember, I was visiting my parents 10 years ago when my emotion was learning to walk. After my father had to talk. And you know how babies learn to walk. They stand up, walk a few steps, and they fall down, walk a few steps, fall down. And my father was looking at him intently. My father said to me, amazing. He's not afraid. If I would be like that, I would walk normally already. That's the circle. Okay? Now, I'm like my father did pretty well for himself, right? The way he used to walk, and he's got fine. I feel like I went cross country skiing. I don't know how you do that. I never cross country. But still, that was part of when he had something to do, he never gave up. And we know we all have that in our life, no matter how, and I'm not talking about religious, spiritual. I remember when I first came here, we ended up buying a car that was fixed. Couldn't get it. No one gave up. I don't want to drive anymore. But believe it or not, my father's vision came before me. He said, "You can do it." Marcus, I did it. The thing, but that's our task is not never, ever give up. I want to make one more thing that I'll stop. Connected, but again, I think that this has to do with my father. My father, learned to hold like his Torah. When my father was missing, and by the way, I have to tell you that I know that my father was an Ahron. And I know that my father, he had his candle at every piece of Torah every year. Well, that's my father. I know that, right? So after my father was next to me, what really impressed me was that all of his students and everyone who came in contact with him, they were so broken. Because they all said they felt my father was. That's really true. Because he really was able to connect to everyone, and he really understood. He really understood everyone. He was, my father in that respect. He saw my father saw every single Jew as being important. But by the way, he would even go ahead and he would even talk we talked about stories how my father was speaking with children, he'd speak to older people, and and I remember people coming to my house, and by the way, I was saying to my mother, but everyone felt comfortable there. Why? Because it always felt my father respected them and would talk to them and look at them as human beings. So, Mr. Hashem, I think that for me, then, those who know my father, those who love my father, inspire us in every moment of our day, and time of our life, and then, as we say, thank everyone for
Yeah, if you want to go ahead, just say, count as a board. Torah Yadir.
Skadal, these Kadash, and Rabba, Yolama, Diver, Steven Litma, Posteri, on him from Carco basis, Royal, Bagalov is Mankarev, and
Main Yeshua Rabam Rachalam Meim Ya.
He's for out, he's for out, he's for out, he's for out, he's for out,